Once upon a time, there was an elderly woman named Mrs. Eleanor, who lived in a small village nestled atop a mountain in the United States. The simplicity of country life brought her joy, but despite its tranquility, she carried a heavy burden in her heart. Mrs. Eleanor was the heir to a substantial fortune left by her parents. Instead of representing comfort, the wealth became a chain that bound her and kept her apart from those around her. From a young age, Eleanor had learned that the true value of life wasn't found in material possessions, but in the human relationships built on generosity and compassion. The wind whispered through the trees that surrounded her little stone house, as if sharing ancient secrets that only she could understand. The walls of the residence held memories of generations, photographs yellowed by time, and objects that carried silent stories of a distant past. It was in this setting, between the rustic beauty of nature and the weight of memories, that Eleanor faced her greatest challenge: what to do with the fortune that seemed more a curse than a blessing. On cold winter nights, sitting by the gently crackling fireplace, she watched the fire consume the wood, turning it to ashes. It was as if those flames reflected the conflict within her soul, the need to transform something solid and tangible into something ethereal, capable of warming and illuminating. Her wrinkled fingers, marked by decades of work, caressed an old photo album where her parents smiled, unaware of the burden their inheritance would represent for their only daughter. Determined not to let the inheritance become a burden, Mrs. Eleanor began distributing part of her fortune in small amounts to the village residents. She helped the sick, fed the hungry, and built a small community center, a space where villagers could gather, learn, and share vital experiences. Her kindness not only changed the lives of the beneficiaries, but also brought new vitality to the village, which began to flourish collectively. Still, an inner voice tormented her. With each act of generosity, Eleanor felt that a weight remained in her soul, a shadow preventing her from feeling completely free and at peace. With slow but determined steps, she walked through the narrow streets of the village, observing the transformations her actions had provoked. The baker, who previously could barely keep his business running, now provided fresh bread for all families, thanks to the new oven Eleanor had financed. The small school, once with a leaky roof and broken desks, now housed smiling children learning in a dignified environment. The face of each child, illuminated by knowledge, was like a ray of sunshine warming the elderly woman's heart. However, as night fell and she returned to her solitary home, the ghost of unease pursued her. Sitting in her rocking chair, with only the tick-tock of the old clock keeping her company, Eleanor questioned whether her actions were sufficient, whether she had found the true purpose for the fortune she still possessed. It was as if each coin stored in her safe had its own voice, whispering accusations about her inability to completely free herself from material attachment. The crescent moon cast ghostly shadows through the window, mysterious patterns that seemed to tell stories of distant worlds, where the value of things was measured not by coins, but by smiles and tears. Eleanor sighed, feeling the weight of the years on her hunched shoulders, and the even greater burden of the decisions she needed to make. Her eyes, already blurred by age, still managed to see beyond appearances, seeking the truth hidden beneath layers of social conventions and others' expectations. One night, a violent storm swept over the village, causing a landslide that threatened to destroy everything. During the calamity, the inhabitants joined forces, and Mrs. Eleanor stood out, using her resources and courage to assist those in need. By the end of the storm, the village had suffered significant damage, but had also strengthened the communal bonds among its residents. However, the elderly woman still felt a deep emptiness inside, a restlessness that made her question the true value of the inheritance she still had left. Raindrops pounded the windows furiously, as if trying to force their way in and take everything they encountered along the path. The sky, once starry, had turned into a dark and menacing mass, torn only by lightning that momentarily illuminated the desolate landscape. Thunder made the ground shake, as if invisible giants were marching over the mountain. Eleanor, awakened by the deafening noise, struggled to get up. Her bones protested against the sudden movement, reminding her of the fragility of her aging body. She put on her thickest coat and, ignoring the fear that suggested she stay home, went out to help her neighbors. The relentless rain immediately soaked her clothes, clinging to her slender frame like a second skin. Her white hair, usually tied in an elegant bun, now hung in wet strands over her wrinkled face. The scene she found was desolate. Partially destroyed houses, centuries-old trees uprooted, frightened animals running aimlessly. But what impressed her most was seeing how, amidst the chaos, ordinary people transformed into anonymous heroes. The blacksmith carried children on his shoulders, taking them to higher places. The seamstress opened her small house to shelter families who had lost everything. The young shepherd risked his life to rescue elderly people trapped in the rubble. With the determination that had always been her trademark, Eleanor turned her home into an improvised shelter. She opened her doors to receive the homeless, emptied her cupboards to feed the hungry, and unlocked her safes to fund the immediate reconstruction of essential bridges and roads. For days she worked tirelessly, ignoring the pain in her joints, driven only by the inner strength that compelled her to do what was right. When the waters finally receded and the sun timidly shone through the dispersing clouds, Eleanor observed the result of the collective efforts. The village was damaged but not destroyed. People were injured but not defeated. There was a new strength circulating among the residents, a sense of unity that transcended social differences and old rivalries. Paradoxically, destruction had built something precious and intangible. It was at that moment, seeing the community rebuild with their own hands what nature had destroyed, that Eleanor felt the void in her chest more intensely. Why, even after giving so much, did she still feel something was incomplete? Why did the satisfaction of helping, though real, seem ephemeral, like morning mist dissipating with the first rays of sunlight? There was something beyond material generosity she needed to discover, a fundamental truth that eluded her understanding. In a moment of reflection, Eleanor had a revelatory dream with an old sage. He, with a wise and serene voice, revealed that true wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give and how we touch the lives around us. The sage presented Eleanor with a deep abyss, representing her fears, greed, and attachment to possessions. He suggested that to free herself from her emotional burden, she should throw her inheritance into that abyss. Upon waking emotionally, torn by the image of the dream, Eleanor found herself reflecting on what truly held her back. What did coins and material goods mean if they weren't used to do good and brighten others' lives? That night, exhausted after days of intense work, Eleanor fell asleep in her rocking chair, wrapped in a simple wool blanket. Her sleep, usually light and interrupted, was surprisingly deep. That's when the dream came, vivid as reality, more real than many of her memories. She found herself walking through an ancient forest, where millennia-old trees stood like pillars of a natural temple. Light filtered through the leaves, creating golden patterns on the moss-covered ground. The air was pure and sweet, scented with wildflowers she couldn't name. An indescribable peace filled that place, as if time flowed differently, slower, and more consciously. In a circular clearing, sitting on a flat stone covered with silvery lichen, was an elderly man. His white beard reached his waist. His eyes were a deep blue that seemed to contain entire oceans. He wore simple clothes, made of rough fabric, but there was something in his posture that emanated royal dignity. When he smiled at Eleanor, she felt as if she was recognized in her deepest essence, as if that stranger knew every thought she had ever had, every tear she had ever shed. "Come closer, daughter of time," he said, with a voice that was simultaneously a whisper and a thunderclap. "You carry a weight that does not belong to you." Eleanor sat beside the sage, feeling an inexplicable familiarity, as if she were reuniting with a childhood friend after decades of separation. "Who are you?" she asked, surprised by the courage in her own voice. "I am the one who guards the secrets of the mountains. I am the keeper of untold stories. I am the echo of forgotten dreams," he replied enigmatically. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is what you seek, Eleanor." He raised a wrinkled hand and pointed beyond the clearing. The forest opened up, revealing an abyss so deep that its darkness seemed to swallow all surrounding light. It was a dizzying void, a portal to the known. "There," said the sage, "lies what you fear most and what you desire most. There is your prison and your freedom." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. The abyss both attracted and repelled her simultaneously. It was as if she could hear voices coming from its depths, echoes of her own doubts and longings. True wealth, the sage continued, is not in what you keep in locked safes. It's not in the coins you count at night or the titles you accumulate. True wealth is in the bridges you build between lonely hearts, in the tears you dry with your generous hands, in the smiles you plant on hopeless faces. He took a handful of soil and let the grains slip through his fingers, like a natural hourglass marking the passage of time. Your inheritance will become your liberation, only when you understand that it isn't yours. Gold is just earth that shines. Jewels are merely stones that reflect light. Money is just paper with printed promises. None of these have real value unless they are transformed into something that transcends matter. With a fluid motion, the sage stood up and led Eleanor to the edge of the abyss. Below, the darkness seemed alive, pulsating like a colossal heart. "Throw everything," he whispered in her ear. "Throw everything you think you possess but that actually possesses you, and then only then you will see the miracle." Eleanor felt warm tears streaming down her wrinkled face. There was a painful truth in the sage's words, a truth she had always known but had refused to confront. Her attachment to the inheritance, even while distributing it, was a form of control, a way to feel important and necessary. It was a veil that covered her fundamental fear, the fear of being nothing beyond what she owned. With trembling hands, she took a small golden key from her pocket, the symbol of her remaining wealth. She hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of that small object in her palm. Then, with a determined movement, she threw it into the abyss. The key spiraled down, shining like an inverted shooting star, until it disappeared into the darkness. The moment it was out of sight, Eleanor felt as if something within her broke, not painfully but liberatingly, like shackles being torn apart. The sage smiled, his eyes reflecting ancient wisdom. "The abyss is not the end, Eleanor. It is only the beginning." It was then that she woke up, her face wet with tears and her heart light as it hadn't felt since childhood. The dream remained vivid in her memory, not as a night fantasy but as a revelation, a call that couldn't be ignored. Inspired by the dream, at the dawn of a new morning, Eleanor made the bold decision to dispose of her entire inheritance. With the loving help of the community, she organized a grand farewell celebration, inviting the village residents. Instead of distributing her fortune in coins, she decided to convert everything into opportunities to help even more of those around her. With her remaining assets, Eleanor built a school, a hospital, and a shelter for the elderly and needy children. Each generous act made her feel lighter, as if the weight that oppressed her was finally dissipating. The morning brought a different kind of clarity, as if the sun itself shone with a new quality of light. Eleanor rose from her chair, where she had spent the night, and walked to the window. The village was slowly awakening, with wisps of smoke rising from chimneys, indicating fires lit to prepare breakfast. Children were already running through the streets, their laughter carried by the wind like little bells. Without hesitation, Eleanor put on her best dress, a simple blue cotton outfit she reserved for special occasions. She meticulously combed her white hair and pinned it with a carved wooden comb, an heirloom from her grandmother. There was no vanity in her gestures, only respect for the importance of the day to come. Her first destination was the carpenter's house, a sturdy man with calloused hands and a generous heart. Michael had lost his wife the previous year and was raising 5 children alone, never losing his dignity or smile. He was the one who built the community center, working nights on end without charging anything beyond the necessary materials. "Michael," said Eleanor, sitting at the simple kitchen table of the carpenter's house, "I need your help to organize a celebration. Not an ordinary party, but an event that will mark the beginning of a new era for our village." The man's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "What kind of celebration, Mrs. Eleanor?" "A celebration of liberation," she replied, with a conviction that surprised herself. "I want to gather all the village residents to announce something important, and I want it to be a day of joy, not formality." In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire. The eccentric elderly woman, known for her generosity, was organizing a grand celebration in the central square. No one knew the exact reason, but everyone felt it would be something memorable. Men, women, and children volunteered to help with the preparations. Long tables were set up under the centuries-old trees, decorated with wildflowers and hand-embroidered tablecloths. Each family contributed what they could: freshly baked bread, artisanal cheeses, homemade wines, traditional sweets. On the morning of the celebration, Eleanor woke up before dawn. She sat in her garden and watched the sky transition from deep black to dark blue, then to lilac, and finally to golden as the sun majestically rose behind the mountains. There was a peace in her heart she had never experienced before, as if each heartbeat was a confirmation that she was on the right path. When she arrived at the square, she found it transformed. Colorful lanterns hung from the tree branches. Abundant tables invited sharing. Musicians tuned their instruments on a small makeshift stage. But what moved her the most was seeing the faces, hundreds of them of all ages, gathered in anticipation. They weren't just the village residents, but also people from neighboring towns, drawn by the news that something extraordinary was about to happen. With slow yet steady steps, Eleanor climbed onto the stage. Silence fell over the crowd like a blanket. The elderly woman took a deep breath, feeling the pure mountain air fill her lungs. Then, with a clear voice that reached even the farthest corners, she began to speak. "My dear friends and neighbors," she said, "I thank each one of you for being here on this day, which I consider the most important of my long life. We are here not just to celebrate, but to transform. To transform what has been a burden into something that will elevate our community to heights never dreamed of." She paused, allowing her words to be absorbed. The gentle breeze swayed her white hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. "You know that I am the heir to a considerable fortune. For years I have tried to use this money to do good, to alleviate suffering, to create opportunities. But recently, I realized that even these actions, though well-intentioned, kept me bound to an illusion. The illusion that material wealth can be the solution to the deepest challenges we face as human beings." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people exchanged confused glances. Others nodded as if they perfectly understood what Eleanor was trying to convey. "Today," she continued, "I announce my decision to completely dispose of my inheritance, not as a gesture of sacrifice or renunciation, but as an act of liberation and transformation. I don't want to simply distribute coins that will be spent and forgotten. I want my fortune to be converted into permanent structures that will benefit not only our generation, but also those that come after us." She then revealed her plans: the construction of a modern school, equipped with a library, laboratories, and spaces for the arts, where children and adults could expand their horizons through knowledge; a well-equipped hospital with resident doctors and affordable medications for everyone, regardless of their financial situation; a welcoming shelter for lonely elderly people and orphaned children; a place where the most vulnerable generations could find not just a roof and food, but also dignity and affection. "I'm not doing this alone," Eleanor explained, tears of emotion in her eyes. "I need the wisdom, skills, and hearts of each one of you. This is not my inheritance being distributed. It's our community building its own future." Eleanor's words sparked an unexpected reaction. People stood up, offering their talents and time. The retired doctor who had lived recluse offered to train young, aspiring medical professionals. The teacher who had studied in the city volunteered to develop an innovative curriculum for the new school. Artisans promised to decorate the new buildings with their work. Farmers committed to providing fresh food for the shelter. What had started as an announcement turned into a collective planning session, a whirlwind of ideas where everyone felt valued and necessary. Eleanor watched, amazed, as her individual decision catalyzed a communal energy that far surpassed the monetary value of her inheritance. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the celebration reached its peak. Music played, people danced, children ran among the tables with painted faces and wide smiles. Eleanor danced too, momentarily forgetting her advanced age, feeling light as a child. In her eyes shone a joy that many had never seen before. The months that followed, the village transformed into a vast construction site. The land was prepared, foundations dug, walls rose toward the sky, each brick laid, each board nailed, each tile set represented not just the construction of buildings, but the building of a new communal spirit. Eleanor was present at every stage, not as an owner or supervisor, but as one among many, contributing what she could. Sometimes it was her knowledge of medicinal plants that helped plan the hospital's therapeutic garden. Other times, it was her old stories that enchanted the children during work breaks. In every gesture, in every word, she demonstrated that true giving wasn't in the money she renounced, but in the giving of herself to the community. With the confirmation of the sage's vision, by throwing all her inheritance into the metaphorical abyss of her old life of attachment, Eleanor became an even richer dowager, filled with love and gratitude. The abyss, which once represented her fear and attachment, was now lush, full of flowers and laughter, as the lives she had touched flourished in gratitude and love. Thus, Eleanor not only freed herself from the prison imposed by her fortune, but also transformed her village into a space of light, joy, and hope. A year after the celebration in the square, the 3 projects were completed. The school, with its wide windows framing the mountains, already welcomed students of all ages. The hospital, equipped with modern technology while maintaining the wisdom of traditional medicine, saved lives and alleviated suffering. The shelter, cozy as a true home, echoed with children's laughter and elderly stories. On that special morning, Eleanor walked slowly to the highest point of the mountain, a place where she could overlook the entire village. The air was clean and fresh, carrying the scent of wildflowers that blanketed the fields. Below, the community pulsed with renewed life. It was then that she remembered the abyss from her dream. She understood that the daunting void represented not only her fears, but also the endless possibilities that arise when we free ourselves from attachment. The abyss she had feared was, in reality, a space for creation, a fertile void where new realities could be sown. And the miracle the sage had promised had come to fruition, not only in the buildings that now served the community, not only in the lives saved or the minds enlightened by knowledge. The true miracle was in the inner transformation Eleanor had experienced. By letting go of everything she believed she possessed, she discovered an immeasurable wealth, the wealth of truly belonging, of being an integral part of something greater than herself. Sitting on a smooth stone, warmed by the morning sun, Eleanor closed her eyes. She felt the wind caress her wrinkled face as if it were the gentle hand of the old sage. She smiled, understanding that she had attained a wisdom that few achieve in a lifetime. The understanding that we are richer by what we give than by what we keep, that our true heritage doesn't lie in material goods, but in the legacy of love we leave in others' hearts. Mrs. Eleanor's story became a parable filled with wisdom to be told and retold for generations. The extraordinary truth about the true meaning of wealth was passed down. True wealth does not reside in possessions, but in the ability to transform lives through love, compassion, and generosity. The elderly woman who threw her entire inheritance into the abyss ended up discovering the freedom and happiness she had long sought, and this fact is undoubtedly a life miracle that renewed the spirit of the entire village. On winter nights when families gathered around crackling fireplaces, Mrs. Eleanor's story was narrated with reverence. The elders who had witnessed the events added personal details, like the peculiar sparkle in the elderly woman's eyes when she announced her decision, the serenity on her face as she watched the constructions take shape, the simplicity with which she lived her final years without any trace of regret. Children listened, fascinated, absorbing not just the facts, but also the implicit values in the narrative. They learned that true abundance isn't in material goods, but in sharing. That true security doesn't come from locked safes, but from united communities. That true happiness isn't in possessing more, but in being more. Over the years, the legend grew, as truly important stories do. Travelers passing through the village heard about the elderly woman who had transformed not only her own life, but an entire community by understanding the fundamental paradox that you need to lose to gain, to empty yourself to be filled, to give to receive. The school, the hospital, and the shelter thrived, expanding beyond their initial physical structures. From the small school emerged a rural university, where traditional knowledge and modern education were equally valued. The hospital became a reference center for integrative medicine, attracting health professionals interested in a holistic approach to care. The shelter evolved into a multi-generational community complex, where the wisdom of the elderly and the energy of children created a perfect balance. The most impressive thing, however, was the spirit that permeated the village, a sense of shared purpose, an instinctual understanding that each person's well-being was intrinsically linked to everyone else's well-being. This was Eleanor's true legacy, more enduring than any stone and mortar construction. In an increasingly society obsessed with accumulation and status, the village became a beacon of alternative possibility, a living reminder that there are other ways to measure value and success. People disenchanted with the relentless race for more money, more possessions, more power, found in Eleanor's story an invitation to rethink their own choices and priorities. Scholars from different fields, economics, sociology, psychology, visited the village, trying to understand the phenomenon. How could a community flourish with such vitality and cooperation in a world marked by competition and individualism? How could the radical gesture of a single person catalyze such a profound and lasting transformation? The answers couldn't be captured in charts or statistics. They were in the sparkle of children's eyes who grew up knowing no scarcity, not just of materials, but also of affection and opportunities. They were in the dignity of the elderly, who contributed their experience and wisdom until their last days. They were in the posture of the adults who had witnessed it all,